Now, as all of you know, tomorrow is the beginning of our Horary Astrology certification course here at the Oraculos School of Astrology. It is something that I am extraordinarily proud of, and it's something that I can't even express how much it means to me to be able to step forward in this way and offer this sort of certification. As many of you know, historically, this particular course has been built into our larger 2-year professional astrologers diploma program. And within that, I've always fashioned this particular course so that if people wanted to only take this and leave, they had the ability to do so. However, this is the first time I'm viewing this particular portion of the training, the first semester of the training, as being a certificate program within itself. And at the Oraculos School of Astrology, we have all of the resources to make that so. And therefore, I said, why don't we just let this next installment of this program be exactly that, a certificate program, so that people who are directly wanting to launch into a professional astrologer's practice have all of the tools at their disposal in order to do so. So if that's something that you're wanting to do, then please know that we start tomorrow. And I hope that at the end of this presentation, if you have any questions, you feel free to ask me about them, because I would definitely love to see you here within this teaching container that is the Oraculos School of Astrology with me. Now, let's dive in. The first question I want to address is this question of what makes Horary Astrology so uncannily accurate. Why should astrology as a system or a practice have the ability to describe the concrete events that occur within our lives and the concrete circumstances that we find ourselves faced with within our lived experience? And the reason for that is because everywhere throughout nature, we find a rippling effect where greater forces of nature are going to be expressed within forces that are subservient or forces that are inferior to those greater forces. The ancients viewed the planets, the 7 classical planets, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon, as being the architects of our physical universe. And in a very real way, they observed or felt, or at least within the context of Hermeticism, which is the basis of the Western mystery teachings, within the context of Hermeticism, there was this thought that this divine intelligence, which for lack of a better word we can call God, created the 7 planets to go about running the affairs of this material world. Therefore, when we look at the actions of the planets, we come to know the face of God, as it were, more clearly than in anything else within nature. Now, the reality is that, once again, nature is like a heart. And from that heart, we have these beating reverberations that extend throughout everything that we find within our natural world. So it is as true that we can see the face of God in a blade of grass, as it is true that we can see the face of God by looking at the alignment of the planets within the sky. But the reality is that we don't have over 4,000 years of study and research of looking for the face of God within blades of grass, but we do have over 4,000 years of study and research when it comes to seeing the divine and interpreting the voice and the will of the divine through the movements of the 7 classical planets against the backdrop of both the fixed stars as well as the signs of the zodiac. So within our evolution as a civilization, we have more tools to assist us in understanding God, or understanding God speak, as it were, the language of the gods, through an observation of the planets, than we do through observing blades of grass or bubbles on the surface of a river or what have you. So what makes Horary Astrology, and by extension all astrology, so uncannily accurate is that all astrology is based on our interpretation of the architects of our physical universe. The planets are the architects of that physical universe. And in the words of Guido Bonatti, we cannot come closer to viewing divine intelligence at work than through viewing the operations of the planets. In other words, the planets are the highest expression of divine intelligence at work that we can come to access within our human form. And as a result of that, those planets, if we understand how to interpret them, we also understand how to better navigate our lives here on this earth. So that's one thing. The planets are the architects of everything that occur within our lives. The planets are the titanic forces in dynamic action, dynamically creating and reflecting everything that occurs within our lives. Therefore, something like natal astrology must reflect our destiny within every lifetime, because that is a law, that is a spiritual law that pervades our universe. And by extension, Horary Astrology must reflect the destiny of the earnestly held question that arises within the moment, because that too is a spiritual law that pervades our universe. What is that spiritual law, you might ask? That spiritual law states that if there is an earnest desire for something to be known or for something to be discovered, that earnestness and the burning nature of that desire, it ejects forward from us into the universe, and it burns a hole onto the very fabric of reality. And because nature itself cannot accept any vacuums within itself, in the same moment as that deep, burning, earnest desire to know and to become wise emits out of ourselves and radiates into the universe, the entire universe radiates or reflects back to us in that exact moment the answer to that question. And this for me is the horary mechanism. And this for me also is the mechanism behind all systems of divination. Within my lifetime, I've had the great pleasure of studying with great depth runes, the ancient Norse runes, the ancient Scandinavian runes as a system of divination. But I've also studied the Kabbalistic tarot. I've also studied the I Ching. I've also studied numerology, all of these as systems of divination. I've studied dream interpretation and I've practiced dream interpretation. And within all of them, the sanctity and the sacredness of the question is truly something that words can't even explain. You know, I said to my students the other day that I don't even ask my own questions via divination, because I hold within myself such a reverence for the act of formulating a question and sending that question out of myself into the cosmos that I just don't. You know, when I was younger, when I was 14, 15, 16, 17, I had stacks and stacks of journals in my bedroom asking, is this person my soulmate? I'm in love with this person. Is this guy going to call me back? You know, all of these things, because I wanted deeply to be ahead of the game, as it were. And I knew that divination had the ability to give me that advantage within life. However, as I look back at my childhood and as I look back at my use of divination over the years, I realized that I have been abusing the gods, as it were. So today, I don't personally practice myself divination with the same vigor that I practice it from my clients. And I also don't practice divination for myself with the same vigor that I practiced it previously, because there is something so sacred about that formation of a question that before I even ask that question, I ask myself first, is there no other way that you can figure this out without disturbing the gods, essentially? So that's my relationship to my own personal divinational practice. And it's been that way for, I dare say, over a decade now. However, this idea that the question is sacred is something that we find not only within Horary astrology literature, but we also find this within ancient geomancy literature. This idea that the question has to be born out of a heart of deep desire. And that is essentially what makes Horary astrology so uncannily accurate. Because when we practice Horary astrology effectively or even efficiently, we practice it only when there is a question that stops the planets. We practice it only when there is a question that we have tried every other way to answer, but we have found no other answer. And so our very soul formulates that question as a person in the wilderness, in the pitch darkness of night, reaching out and crying out to the gods and essentially demanding an audience with those gods, because we have ran out of all of our human possibilities to have this question answered.